The wheels of the plane touched down at LAX with a jolt that snapped me awake. For once, I wasn't thinking about building lines and city grids. I was just tired, bone deep tired. The summit in Tokyo had been a triumph for my career, but 3 days of speeches, client dinners, and pretending I wasn't jet lagged had wrung me dry. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Pasadena, the sky was a dull peach gray, the kind of light that made the house I designed look like it was holding its breath. This was the home I had poured myself into, 3 years of sketches and models and arguments over wood stain versus steel finish. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. But the first thing I saw wasn't the front door or the flower beds Darren planted last summer. It was the envelope. A sealed, heavy envelope with my name scrawled across it in Darren's neat, almost mechanical handwriting. I stood there for a second, still in my Navy travel suit, briefcase dangling from my fingers, my mind refusing to compute. He could have texted. He could have waited until I walked inside. But this was deliberate. I bent down slowly like the paper might burn me and picked it up. My first thought was something practical, stupid even. Maybe it's from the HOA, maybe it's a bank statement. But the weight of the paper and the return address, his lawyer's office, made my stomach knot. I carried it inside, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. Everything was spotless, just as I had left it. Darren's mug sat in the sink. A single shoe, our daughter Sophie's sneaker, lay abandoned near the stairs. For a moment, I felt like an intruder in my own house. I set my briefcase down and ran my thumb under the seal. The sound of tearing paper felt too loud, like it was slicing into something bigger. When I unfolded the document, I stopped breathing. Petition for dissolution of marriage, it read. But that wasn't the worst of it. Below, in blunt legal phrasing, was Darren's request for sole custody of Sophie. His reasoning? That I was an unfit parent, my work schedule leaving me absent from the emotional and practical demands of motherhood. I stared at the words until they blurred. Darren wanted to erase me, not just from his life, but from hers. The daughter I'd sung to sleep when she was colicky, the girl who sent me sketches of our dream house when I was stuck in London for a project. The room around me felt foreign, the walls colder. I could still smell the faint cedar from the custom cabinetry I'd chosen, but it was like someone else's home now. I sank onto the bench in the entryway, the envelope trembling in my hands. My breath came shallow, like the air itself didn't belong to me anymore. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just sat there silent and still, as if moving might make it more real. In that moment, I realized something. My battles weren't going to be fought in boardrooms or on construction sites anymore. This was my new battlefield, and it started here, in the house I built but no longer recognized. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. Not the envelope that still felt like a sucker punch, but the quiet, creeping distance that had settled over our house long before I left for Tokyo. Our marriage didn't explode, it froze. I remember one Tuesday night about 6 months ago. We sat down for dinner, the three of us, like we always tried to. Sophie was making jokes about her history teacher's funny eyebrows, giggling in that way that made her braces sparkle. She was trying to pull us into her world, to make us laugh. I smiled, but I couldn't feel it. My mind was still in the office, stuck on a zoning permit that needed approval by morning. I pushed my food around the plate, grilled chicken, steamed broccoli, Darren's favorite, and I could feel him watching me. Not with anger, not even disappointment, just detachment. When Sophie asked if we could all play cards after dinner, Darren answered before I could. "Maybe tomorrow, kiddo," he said, patting her hand. She looked at me, hopeful, but I just shook my head, offering some weak excuse about an early morning call with Berlin. Sophie shrugged and carried her plate to the sink, humming to herself, trying to fill the silence we left behind. After she went upstairs, Darren and I sat in the living room. He on one end of the couch, me on the other, the glow of the TV flickering between us. I don't even remember what we were watching, probably one of those home renovation shows he liked. But the noise barely registered. I looked at him, really looked, and it hit me that I couldn't remember the last time he smiled at me without it being out of habit. There were no fights, no cruel words, just this empty, polite distance, like two people waiting for something to end without admitting it was already over. The house around us didn't help. We had built it together, or at least that's what I told myself. The glass atrium, the clean lines of the staircase, the pale oak floors, it was all my vision. He had gone along with every choice, nodding when I asked his opinion, like it didn't really matter. Now, it felt like I was walking through a showroom instead of a home. Everything looked perfect, but there was no warmth left in it. No life. I used to believe that if I just worked harder, if I won one more award, signed one more contract, brought in one more project, then maybe the house would feel full again. Maybe Darren would look at me like he used to, back when we were just a broke couple in a rented loft sketching out dream kitchens on napkins. But as I sat there that night with him staring at the muted TV and me thinking about deadlines, I realized something awful. I had become a visitor in my own family. The confrontation didn't come from Darren alone. If it had, maybe I could have managed the anger, the shock. But when my own family stepped in, siding with him, it felt like the foundation beneath me gave way. It was 2 days after I found the envelope. I hadn't called Darren yet, I couldn't. I had barely been able to look at Sophie without feeling the weight of what might happen, so I buried myself in the only thing I could control: work. That afternoon, I got a text from my sister Claire. Need to talk. At your place in 20. There was no question mark, no preamble, just that. When the doorbell rang, I opened it expecting Claire and maybe her husband. Instead, I saw Claire, my mother, and Darren all standing there like a tribunal. My mother clutched her purse the way she did when she was about to deliver bad news. They followed me into the glass atrium, my pride, my favorite part of this house. The sunlight spilled across the polished concrete floor, throwing sharp angles on the walls. I designed this space to feel open, welcoming. Today it felt like a courtroom. "Why are you all here?" I asked, my voice flatter than I intended. Darren didn't answer right away. It was my mother who spoke first. "Nora, we need to talk about Sophie." Her tone was so measured it set my teeth on edge. I crossed my arms. "Talk about Sophie? Or talk about the fact that you've all decided I'm a bad mother?" "Nora," Darren began, but my mother cut him off. "You've been gone too much. These trips, the long hours, it's not healthy. Sophie needs stability, not a mother who's halfway across the world." I stared at her, stunned. This was the same woman who had bragged to her friends about my magazine features, my firm's awards. The same mother who told everyone, "My daughter designs cities." Claire cleared her throat, her voice unusually formal. "We just think Darren is better suited to handle Sophie's day-to-day needs right now. And if this goes to court, well, we'll testify to that." I blinked, trying to process her words. "Testify? You're talking about me like I'm some stranger who abandoned her kid." "Claire's right," my mother added. "You've chosen skyscrapers over family for too long. Someone has to think about Sophie's well-being." Their words landed like bricks, one after another, each heavier than the last. I couldn't bring myself to argue. Not because they were right, they weren't, but because I couldn't believe I was standing in my own home being told I wasn't enough. Darren stayed silent through most of it, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed like he'd already won. Finally, I said, "Are you all done?" My voice was quiet but steady. They didn't answer. They just exchanged glances and began walking toward the door. The sound of it closing behind them was so sharp, so final, it felt like a verdict. For a long time, I stood there in the atrium, staring at the sunlight on the floor. My home, the one I built, the one I thought would hold us together, felt like nothing but glass and steel now. The story broke 3 days later. I was at a cafe downtown trying to gather my thoughts between meetings when I saw the headline flash on someone's tablet screen. "Too driven to parent, award-winning architect faces custody challenge." I didn't even need to read the article to know it was about me. My phone was already vibrating with texts, half of them from colleagues asking if I was doing okay, the other half from strangers who suddenly felt entitled to weigh in on my life. I clicked on the link and there it was, a photo of me standing on a construction site in Tokyo, hard hat on, arms crossed, the caption labeling me the architect who builds cities but neglects her own home. The words blurred, but I forced myself to keep reading. Quotes from sources close to the family hinted that I was never around, that Darren was the steady parent. It didn't take a genius to figure out who those sources were. The worst part wasn't the article, it was the comments. "Classic career woman puts her kid last. Why have a child if you're just going to dump her with the dad? I bet she doesn't even know her daughter's favorite color." I sat there with my coffee growing cold, staring at the screen while the world told me who I was. Cold, ambitious, a blueprint of a mother instead of the real thing. When I looked up, I saw someone I recognized from the PTA at Sophie's school, Jenna, with her ever-present yoga mat and big smile. She saw me too, but instead of waving, she turned abruptly and left, her latte still half full. That was the moment I understood the cost of staying silent. If I didn't tell my story, someone else would write it for me, and they'd write it wrong. I walked out of the cafe, my hands trembling. For the first time in my career, I didn't care about deadlines or contracts. I cared about Sophie seeing this garbage online and thinking maybe her dad was right. Maybe I didn't care enough. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I used to help Sophie with her science projects, and opened my laptop. I started drafting, not buildings, not city grids, but the outline of a fight. I wasn't going to scream or make public statements. That wasn't me. But I realized if I wanted to protect my daughter and myself, I had to reclaim the narrative. I closed my eyes for a moment, imagining Sophie's face, the way she used to lean on me when we watched old Disney movies. I wasn't going to let her forget who I was. I've always built my life in layers: blueprints, calculations, revisions. It's how I've survived in architecture, and now it's how I had to survive this. I decided to approach the custody fight the way I'd design a building, with precision. No emotion, no wasted movements. Every night, after Sophie went to bed, I sat at the long walnut desk in my study. The cracked mirror above it had always bothered me, a mistake from the movers, a small fracture that spread over time. Now I couldn't stop looking at it. That broken reflection felt like me, imperfect, splintered, but still standing. I started gathering evidence, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I dug through old emails and texts, birthday cards Sophie made for me, school notes thanking me for chaperoning her field trips, photos of us at the cabin last summer, her grinning with mud on her face, my arm around her shoulder. Proof that I wasn't some absent figure Darren and my family were painting me as. Next came my work life. I emailed past clients and colleagues, asking for character references, not as a star architect, but as a mother they had seen outside of deadlines and contracts. My assistant, Jamie, sent me a letter she'd written without me asking. "You taught me that you can care about people and still reach for big things," she wrote. "You love Sophie in a way that inspires how I want to be as a parent someday." I cried when I read that. Not loud, sobbing tears, but the quiet kind that just leak out because you've been holding everything too tightly. I hired a child psychologist, someone neutral who could visit our home and observe what life here was really like. I wasn't afraid of being evaluated. I wanted someone objective to see the truth. I scheduled the meeting myself and made sure Sophie knew it wasn't a test, just a conversation. Meanwhile, Darren stayed quiet. No calls, no messages. It was as if we were strangers passing each other on opposite sides of a city skyline. One night, around 2 a.m., I was flipping through Sophie's old art projects when I found a drawing she made in second grade. It was our family, me, Darren, and her, standing under a house she drew with bright red crayon. But she'd labeled it Mom's house, not our house, Mom's. That hit me harder than any legal petition. Maybe somewhere in her small but observant mind, Sophie already knew who had built her world brick by brick. The next day, I called my attorney, a woman named Rachel, who had the calm, firm voice of someone who didn't scare easily. "We need to build this like a case study," I told her. "Not emotional, factual, like blueprints." "Good," Rachel said. "That's how we win." I lined up character witnesses, friends, neighbors, even Sophie's piano teacher, who'd seen me race across town to make her recitals despite deadlines. I started assembling everything into a single, thick binder labeled Mom's Case in bold marker. It wasn't anger that filled those pages, it was proof. Late one night, I stood in front of that cracked mirror again, staring at my reflection under the soft desk lamp. My face looked tired, older than 45. But behind my own eyes, I saw something I hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. I wasn't going to let this house, or my daughter, slip away from me. The betrayal came quietly, like a draft seeping through a window you thought was sealed. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just finished a late meeting over Zoom and stepped into the hallway when I caught Claire's voice. She was in the living room, her back to me, speaking in the low, clipped tone she used when she thought she was being clever. "Don't worry," she said. "I told Darren we're behind him. He just needs to follow through with the petition. I'll talk to Mom about her statement. She'll do it, especially if you're helping her with the house payments." My stomach tightened. I stood frozen, listening. Darren's voice was faint but unmistakable on the other end. "Debt forgiveness, Claire. We agreed. I'm covering that credit card mess you had last year. You just need to stick to the story." Claire laughed softly, like this was all some business arrangement. "You're lucky I don't like Nora's attitude these days. I can make this sound convincing." I walked away before I heard more. I didn't trust myself to listen without breaking something. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the darkened hallway. My own sister selling me out for a clean balance sheet. And my mother, well, I didn't even need proof for her. She'd been circling Darren for weeks, calling him the responsible one when I wasn't around. The next morning, I confronted my mother. We met in her kitchen, the same place where she once bragged about my architecture awards to anyone who'd listen. "You're siding with Darren," I said flatly. Her hands stilled over the coffee pot. "Nora, I'm not siding with anyone. I just think Darren offers Sophie more predictability. He's home, he's steady." "Predictable?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You mean he's safe, comfortable, not too complicated, not too me?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. That evening, I sat in my study, flipping through Sophie's photos on my phone. There was one from her 10th birthday, Darren holding the cake, Sophie in her unicorn pajamas, and me still in my work blazer, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. I built everything I could for this family, and now they were trading me in for convenience. But something shifted inside me as I stared at that picture. I stopped seeing them as villains and started seeing them for what they really were. Scared. Claire needed Darren's money. Mom needed someone who would keep the family machine running smoothly. None of it was about love or loyalty. That realization didn't soften the hurt, but it gave me clarity. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about autonomy, about not letting fear, their fear, erase me. I closed the photo app and opened my binder. This wasn't personal anymore. It was strategy. And if they thought I was going to fold under their little alliance, they didn't know me at all. The tip came in the form of an anonymous email. No subject line, no greeting, just a single sentence. "Look into Celeste's past if you care about Sophie's future." Celeste, Darren's new girlfriend. I stared at the message for a long time, my stomach twisting. I hadn't wanted to think about Celeste at all. She was younger, polished, and all too eager to play the role of Sophie's bonus mom. Every time I dropped Sophie off at Darren's, I noticed how Celeste hovered, a hand on Sophie's shoulder, a sugary tone that never reached her eyes. For days, I debated ignoring the email, but something inside me, a quiet instinct, told me not to. That weekend, after Sophie went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and started digging. A simple search of Celeste's name pulled up fragments of her life, social media posts of yoga poses, a few smiling photos with Darren. But as I went deeper, the cracks started showing. Buried in public records, I found something that made my skin prickle. Sealed welfare documents, court cases involving neglect allegations toward her own child from a previous relationship. The more I read, the more I felt that creeping sense of dread. Her ex-partner had accused her of leaving their toddler home alone for hours. Nothing had resulted in a conviction, but the patterns were there, reports, witnesses, stories that all painted a similar picture. I sat back in my chair, shaking. Suddenly, small moments with Celeste clicked into place. The way Sophie once mentioned that Celeste doesn't like noise, her voice small and uncertain. Or the time Sophie came home quieter than usual, her sleeves pulled down in that way she did when she felt uncomfortable. I remembered asking, "Everything okay, sweetie?" And her shrugging, "It's fine. Celeste just gets mad when I forget to say please." That night, I barely slept. I couldn't shake the image of Sophie stuck in a house where someone like Celeste might let her feel small, invisible. By morning, I knew I had to add this to my case, not out of revenge, but protection. I called Rachel, my attorney, and told her everything I'd found. "Get it all documented," she said firmly. "We'll need evidence, not just suspicion, witnesses, reports, anything credible." So I started assembling a new section in my binder, Celeste. I reached out to a friend who worked in child advocacy. She connected me with someone who had access to archived records, and by the end of the week, I had copies of old court filings. None of it was damning enough on its own, but together it told a story, a pattern of negligence, of someone who shouldn't be trusted with Sophie's well-being. I felt a coldness settle in me as I slid each page into its plastic sleeve. This wasn't just about me proving I was fit to be a mother. It was about showing who truly wasn't. The next time I saw Sophie, she ran up to me, chattering about a science project she was working on with her best friend. I hugged her a little longer than usual, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. She didn't know any of this. She didn't need to. But I knew as I looked at her that this fight wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about making sure she was safe. The morning of the hearing felt nothing like I'd imagined. There was no rush of adrenaline, no cinematic soundtrack in my head, just a steady, quiet calm like the stillness before a storm. I dressed carefully, as if every thread of fabric mattered. A dark gray suit, custom-tailored but understated. Architectural, not corporate. I wanted to look like me, not someone playing a part. I tied my hair back, slipped on simple pearl earrings, and stood in front of the cracked mirror one last time. My reflection wasn't flawless, but it looked strong. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of rain, though the skies were clear. Darren was already there, standing with Celeste near the entrance. He didn't look at me, but Celeste did, her sharp gaze flicking over my outfit like it was some kind of competition. Rachel met me on the courthouse steps. "You ready?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate, almost suffocating. The walls were lined with wood panels, the air heavy with the mix of paper and old carpet. The judge, a tall woman with steel gray hair, glanced at me as I entered, and for the briefest moment I saw something that looked like recognition. Respect, maybe. Darren's attorney went first. His voice was smooth, rehearsed, and calculated, painting me as a brilliant professional who had unfortunately prioritized career over caregiving. He used words like distant and unavailable. Celeste sat behind him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, looking like the poster child for domestic serenity. I didn't say a word. When Rachel stood, the shift in the room was palpable. She began by presenting my binder, page after page of evidence. Photos, school attendance logs, character letters from neighbors and Sophie's teachers. There was a video clip of Sophie and me in the backyard laughing as we built a cardboard model for her history project. "She's not absent," Rachel said firmly. "She's a mother who shows up, whether the world is watching or not." Then came the evidence on Celeste. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the soft hum of the air vent as Rachel detailed the old neglect filings. She didn't embellish, she didn't attack. She simply laid the truth out like a blueprint. The judge's gaze sharpened. Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Celeste's face, which had been so composed, started to crack around the edges. When Rachel finished, she turned to me. "Mrs. Breen, do you have anything to add?" I stood slowly. My legs felt steady, though my heart pounded. "I don't have much to say," I began, my voice quieter than I expected, but clear. "I build cities for a living. I know what it means to plan, to care about the people who live in what I create. And I've done the same with my daughter. She's not just my child, she's my foundation, and I will never abandon her." Silence followed. No one moved. Even the court reporter paused for a fraction of a second before resuming. When I sat down, Rachel leaned toward me and whispered, "You just won this room." The judge took her time before speaking, flipping through the pages of evidence like she was reading a map to the truth. I sat there with my hands clasped, my breath shallow but steady. Every second stretched like a steel beam under too much weight. Finally, she looked up. After reviewing all materials and testimony, the court grants full custody of Sophie Breen to her mother, Nora Breen. The petition for sole custody by Darren Breen is denied. The words landed softly but powerfully, like the sound of a door unlocking. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled, a slow, controlled release of the air I'd been holding for weeks. Beside me, Rachel squeezed my hand once. A silent, "We did it." Darren's face told its own story. First disbelief, his jaw slack, as if he hadn't prepared for this outcome. Then anger, tight and controlled, like a fire he couldn't show in front of the judge. Celeste shifted in her chair, her posture collapsing inward, as though all the confidence she'd worn like a shield had just cracked. The room emptied slowly. Lawyers gathered their papers. The court reporter packed up her machine. My mother and Claire sat in the back, silent, their expressions unreadable. I didn't expect an apology from either of them. Not now, maybe not ever. As I walked past, my mother's gaze flicked to mine. There was something there, shame maybe, but no words. Claire stared at the floor like she was trying to disappear into it. Darren stood near the doorway, his hand gripping the back of a chair. "Nora," he murmured when I passed him. His voice was hoarse. I'm sorry." I didn't stop. I didn't answer. Whatever apology he thought he owed me, it was too late. Too hollow. Outside, the sun hit me in the face, bright and almost blinding. For a second, I just stood there on the courthouse steps, breathing in the sharp air like I was waking up from a long, suffocating dream. Then I saw her, Sophie, waiting by the car with my friend Sarah, who had picked her up from school. Sophie spotted me and ran over, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. "Mom!" she called. I bent down, my knees hitting the concrete as I caught her in my arms. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just held her, feeling her heartbeat against mine. "Are you okay?" she asked, her small voice muffled against my shoulder. I nodded, brushing her hair back. Better than okay. We didn't need to talk about the courtroom, about the fight I'd just won. None of that mattered here, in this moment. What mattered was that she was mine, safe and whole. Behind me, I could hear Darren's footsteps on the stairs. I turned just enough to see him standing there, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. He looked tired, defeated, maybe even regretful. I rose, holding Sophie's hand. As we walked past him, he murmured again, "I really am sorry." This time I met his eyes, but I said nothing. Some battles don't end with words. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, weeks after the court hearing, when Sophie and I found ourselves at the little city park near our house. It wasn't anything special, just a stretch of grass, a few swings, and a bench under an oak tree, but it was ours. I'd promised her ice cream, so we sat there with melting cones, watching the breeze scatter leaves across the path. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about legal strategies or headlines or who might be judging me. It was just me and my daughter, the way it should be. "You have chocolate on your nose," I said, pointing to her face. Sophie laughed and wiped at her nose with the back of her hand, smearing it even more. "Did I get it?" "Not even close," I teased, leaning over with a napkin to clean it off. She grinned, a little gap in her smile where her baby tooth used to be. We didn't talk about the court case. We didn't talk about Darren or Celeste or any of the drama that had wrapped itself around our lives. Instead, Sophie asked about my favorite color when I was her age, what books I liked to read, and if I'd ever gotten in trouble at school. I told her about the time I'd climbed onto the roof of our garage to watch fireworks, and my mom nearly fainted when she found me. Sophie laughed so hard she nearly dropped her cone. I realized then that healing wasn't about big victories or grand gestures. It was about these small, simple moments. Listening to her laugh, feeling the sun on my face, knowing that I didn't have to fight for my place in her life anymore. After a while, Sophie held out her ice cream. "Want a bite?" I smiled. "You're sharing? This must be serious." "Don't make it weird, Mom," she said, but she was still smiling as I took a bite. We sat there a long time, not saying much. The world around us kept moving. Kids squealing on the swings, a couple walking their dog, a car passing in the distance. But for us, time slowed down. I looked at her, really looked at her, with her messy ponytail and her grass-stained jeans, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not triumph, not relief. Just peace. The war was over. Sophie leaned her head against my arm. "Can we come here every Sunday?" "Yeah," I said softly. "Every Sunday." I knew there would still be challenges. Parenting doesn't stop being hard just because you win a court case. But as I sat there sharing ice cream and inside jokes with the person who mattered most, I understood something vital. This quiet, ordinary moment, was the kind of foundation worth building on.